Afternoon, everyone. Charles Moskowitz here. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. And my guest is Dean Ruder. He is the author of The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil. Dean is a general counsel of the Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy. He's a fellow at the National Security Institute at George Mason University, Antonin Scalia Law School. Dean, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
It's great to be on with you. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Before we get into the topic at hand, I know that you've worked as a inspector general for two federal agencies. So I want to ask you. A lawyer friend asked me to ask you this. President Trump has fired one of the inspectors general, that being Atkinson at Intelligence, which for reasons that could be argued are understandable. However, he has also, as of a couple of days ago, fired two additional inspectors, one in the Department of Defense and the other in the Department of Health and Human Services. What do you make of that? What's going on? Is this some kind of an attempt to hide bad news, or why is he doing it?
Well, no, I don't think so. Inspectors general are strange animals to begin with. You know, we have in this country a structural constitution which provides for the separation of powers, and the president has all the authority to execute the laws and apply the laws. You see some dissonance in that notion when Congress passes a statute and tries to oversee executive branch agencies with an inspector general. So the IG is this sort of strange animal that straddles the line between the legislative branch and the executive branch, reports to the agency, but also reports to Congress, and can be a source of good in terms of advising an agency or policing fraud, waste, and abuse, but can also be an active sort of opponent to executive policies. I haven't examined the facts on the ground in these two instances, but to the extent that those IGs are interfering with policy implementation, that's
so. And is it unprecedented for a president to fire inspectors general, or is this something that's been done in other administrations?
Oh, it's been done in other administrations.
Okay.
It's not wildly common, but it happens. I mean, there are 100 or so IGs, and every administration will probably, in the course of 4 years, fire 4 or 5 or 6 of them.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. All right, I want to get on to your very interesting book, The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil. I think that it's becoming increasingly known that in the post-World War II period, both the United States and the Soviet Union essentially poached various Nazis as the Nazi regime collapsed for reasons of competing in the Cold War. People like Wernher von Braun, who was sanitized and put on the cover of Time magazine as the rocket scientist, as helping the NASA, and other lesser-known people, and the Soviets got their share of them as well. But it seems to me that this particular case, Hans Kammler, falls outside of the purview of that. So what can you tell us about the main figure in your book, Hans Kammler? Who was he, and why did he fall through the cracks?
So that's a good question to start with. He was an architect and an engineer in the early parts of the war, in the middle years of the war. It was him that helped make the Holocaust possible. He identified Auschwitz as the site for the killing camp, and then created the gas chambers and the ovens, and then repeated his work throughout the Reich, creating hundreds of concentration camps, both slave labor camps and killing camps. Wernher von Braun. So, conventional history assumes that the United States sort of stumbled on this rocket team, and we just were the victims of good fortune in getting the rocket team, which helped us build our ICBM and do our moonshot, win the Cold War. But we show in The Hidden Nazi that it was Hans Kammler, the hidden Nazi, who actually delivered a team to the United States in an attempt to save his own life and erase his Holocaust past. The problem with our theory is that it's conventional history. Hans Kammler and shot and killed. He didn't commit suicide at the end of the war. he actually surrendered to the U.S. Army.
Well, I mean, and in this particular case, it's very troubling because of his enormous involvement in the worst aspects of the Nazi movement, and I mean the fact that this would have happened and that it's only coming to light now, thanks to your book, is not only troubling in itself, but it raises some other questions about who else was let off the hook. I know that, just as a side here, in the course of my researching for my book, The Nazi Connection to Islamic Terrorism, I discovered that this Hans von Verscher, who was a psychiatrist who was Mengelé's boss, and who, Josef Mengele, and who did some really horrendous and gruesome experiments on people in the death camps, he not only did he get off scot-free at the end of the war, but he actually went right back to work, and he died peacefully in the 1970s in his hometown. They ran an obituary. There was no consequences at all. And it makes me think that there were a lot of people in various professions who got off because of their credentials or because they might have had international connections, perhaps in his case with other psychiatric institutes or other psychiatrists, and that there was no consequences for their actions at all.
That's very true. We actively recruited former Nazis for two primary purposes. I think you could put them into two categories. Those who had some technical knowledge or expertise that we wanted, whether that was rocket technology, radar technology, nuclear technology, all sorts of things the Germans were very far advanced in, or intelligence assets. The Nazis who had been in Eastern Europe and Central Europe fighting the Soviets as intelligence assets that had intelligence networks that we wanted. And remember, not only did we want all of these things, we wanted to have them. There are moral questions that allude to about the propriety of the United States recruiting the principal players who were responsible for World War II and the Holocaust.
And
it's a very difficult question.
Oh, it is, and it brings up obviously some serious moral questions about the war. And I think it's safe to say that had there not been, in the real sense, a continuation of the war because of the success and indeed the marching forward of the Soviet Union, then this would never have happened. But we were dealing with, as you say in your book, pragmatism over ethics in our quest. Talk about your research on this? How did you come across the data that you got to? Because there's some extraordinary things here.
Yeah, there really are. There's a fellow, if you look at the book, there are three authors on the book. I'm the principal author, but two of the other authors were researchers. One of them I've known from college, and he came to me about 12 years ago, asked me to write an agreement so these two researchers who stumbled upon each other on a World War II forum could share their information. They realized in basically a chat room that they were both researching the hidden Nazi, Hans Kammler. They wanted to share this information, and I drafted this agreement, and my friend Keith Chester started feeding me bits and pieces of this story. And I was very skeptical, I have to say, because I thought there's no way possible that there is the highest ranking general. I mean, this guy rose to the highest commissioned officer. I thought there's no way possible that he could have survived the war with help from the Americans, and nobody's written about it.
Well, it seems to me that not only was nothing written about it, but his name was obscured. No one's ever heard of him until now. So, what actually did you come across any data that would indicate what happened to him? Where did he end? Did he end up in Argentina? I mean, what actually happened to Kammler? Was he given a new identity?
So, yeah, the conventional history is he committed suicide in May of 1945, 75 years ago this month. What we prove in the book is he actually surrendered to the U.S. Army. We had him in custody for 10 months. There's an extradition request from Great Britain. Great Britain wants Hans Kammler because he was actually in the field launching these missiles at London and Southampton. So they want to try him. There's a note in the file saying we don't have any objection to his extradition, and then everything just evaporates from that point forward. There's no record, as if he never was an active cover.
So then there's nothing that could be uncovered, perhaps that remains classified regarding Kamler, maybe that would trace him up to what eventually became of him, or is that impossible to pierce?
That's a good question. In the book, we lay out the three most likely scenarios for him, and we talk about our research, and we talk about some of the documents we're not able to get that we know exist. We went to archives all over the world, military bases, small libraries, collections, and there are some documents under the Freedom of Information Act in the U.S. government files that the U.S. still will not disclose. Two of them are particularly enticing. One is 35 pages. The other is 87 pages. They both refer to Hans Kamler, and the government won't even give us redacted versions of those. But that first document was created in 1969, 2016. The second document really raised eyebrows.
It's incredible to me that these documents would not be completely released. After all, all of the principals are dead. The Soviet Union is dead. The Nazis are dead, politically. And there's no national security reason why we can't get to the truth. And yet the National Archives and the other national security agencies that were created after 1948, they still keep secrets. In fact, I understand that there are still secrets that go all the way back to the War of 1812. It's just wrong. Why can't, don't they have to have some kind of a legal justification for denying the release of these documents? Don't they have to show that there's some national security concerns here?
They do. There are exemptions for production of documents under the Freedom of Information Act. The exemption they claimed was that these documents were created by foreign governments. Having said that, there's an appeal process. We appealed. The appeal was denied. We renewed the request a few years later, and this is from the U.S. Department of Justice. At that point in time, they said, we don't even have these documents.
Oh, boy.
We realized we had them, but we no longer have them. So, some of it, I think, is at this point, it's just sort of bureaucratic fumbling. I don't know that there's an active cover-up, but I think pages of SS records were destroyed at the end of the war.
Right.
And records from the agency that we're convinced recruited Hans Kamler from the period of 1945 to 1947 do not exist. There are no records for the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps Region 4 from 1945 to 1947.
Well, first of all, whatever foreign governments would be involved here no longer exist. It sounds like Hillary's email server. It just disappeared. And it's like destroyed. It's just, to me, I hope that if there's one thing we could learn from this book, other than the fact that, in post-World War II, our government was playing footsie with Nazis, including some of the worst members, it is this continued secrecy and this veil of secrecy that is around that is not appropriate in this free country.
Yeah, I do think that there was an active cover-up of the Hans Kamler deal, what we call the Kamler deal, in the years after the war. And people involved in it were very interested in their stories not getting out. As you say, all those people are dead now. I think what happens now is records have been destroyed. They can't be duplicated at this point. They don't exist. Or 75 years ago, they were intentionally misfiled in a way that they just can't be discovered. So I don't think there's anyone actively trying to cover this information.
Well, Dean, I hope that you can continue on the course, or others can continue on the course of getting information declassified. I know that recently, about a year ago, President Trump talked about declassifying information about the Kennedy assassination, and he was stopped. Apparently, he was able to declassify some of it, but why would that need to still be classified? Who knows? Everyone involved in that is dead. why don't we have a right to know the true nature of these events and history? I mean, it can only benefit our nation and our society to know the truth. We can handle the truth.
That's a great tagline and probably a great way to wrap up.
Yes. Anyways, Dean Ruder, where can people get your excellent book?
It's available in bookstores if you can ever get yourself back into a bookstore, but really the best way to get it now is Amazon or Barnes & Noble online. All of the online bookstores have it. It can be delivered. It's in all formats, too. You can buy a hardback copy. You can buy it on CD. You can buy the Audible version, which will come right to your computer. You can buy the Kindle version, likewise, which will come right to your computer. So it's easy to find.
Excellent. Okay, the book is The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil. I'll put a link up to it on the show. Dean Ruder, I want